Hey guys, and welcome to a series of discussion videos I'm going to do before Age of Ultron, since I'm very excited for it, and the Daredevil just came out this month, so let's talk about some Marvel stuff and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I'm going to be doing some discussion videos with my friend Tom here, with all 10 Marvel movies leading up to Age of Ultron, starting with Iron Man. And I did not actually see Iron Man in theaters.
What's wrong with you?
I don't know. I didn't really see movies that much, like back in the day. Back in the day, like late
In the day of 2008.
2008.
iPhone 3G, walking around with your non-existent iPad, and oh man.
Yeah, I didn't see many movies in theaters. I just kind of waited for them to come out on DVD, then watch them like on the internet. But yeah, Iron Man is a really good movie.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I still remember, because this was around, Iron Man came out around the same time, or I think it was a little while after Spider-Man 3 did.
Yeah, it was actually a year later. Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember there was Comic-Con or something. There was interviewing some dude, and they were talking about Spider-Man 3 and Iron Man because neither of them had come out. And they're like, so which one are you personally more excited for? And the guy said, I'm really, really excited with what we're doing with Iron Man. And at the time, I knew Iron Man, I knew the character. It's I had read Civil War, which had come out probably either the year before or that year that this interview happened. So I knew who Iron Man was, and I've been a comic book fan all my life. But I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, so I was like, what the fuck, this guy doesn't know. Spider-Man 3 is so much better than Iron Man, because Spider-Man's coolest. And then Spider-Man 3 sucked balls. And then Iron Man drops, and just what the this movie has no, reason to be as fantastic as it is. But Iron Man really is I mean, there was no Marvel Cinematic Universe before Iron Man.
Right.
And Marvel movies weren't done in-house by Marvel Studios. They were all done, I think, mostly by Fox was doing a lot of them.
Yeah, Marvel Studios, Iron Man was their first movie.
And holy shit, they really brought their A game. And that movie was amazing. It was so good.
Yeah.
So
also I haven't watched it since Iron Man 2, because I watched Iron Man and then went to go see Iron Man 2 when that came out in 2010. But yeah, I hadn't watched it since then, and I forgot that Agent Coulson was actually in this movie, because he's I think yeah, after Tony Stark escapes where Afghanistan, and then comes back home, and then Agent Coulson talks to Pepper about Shield. So I was like, oh, I forgot that happened.
Yeah, that's where they came up with the acronym for S.H.I.E.L.D. was in that movie, in the cinematic universe, because obviously S.H.I.E.L.D.'s been around forever in the comics. But yeah, Coulson was in that movie a lot, and just speaking of the casting in that movie was really spot on, I thought.
Yeah.
I thought all the characters, I mean, obviously, Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark was perfection, and the guy really fought for the role, and he put his all into it, and now you can't imagine anybody else as Tony Stark. They've kind of become one and the same person.
Yeah.
Which is really just kind of crazy.
Like I said on the podcast, he's going to become the actual Birdman if you've watched Birdman, because have you watched Birdman?
I haven't seen it. I need to, though.
Well, it's pretty much about a a has-been actor who wants to do Broadway, but he's only known for doing a superhero role. So Robert Downey Jr. is going to become Birdman.
Yeah.
Later on, after all of the Marvel movies are done, and after Avengers Infinity War, I'm not sure what they're going to do after that. I'm sure there's more storylines they can do.
Oh, it'll always keep going on. I mean, Civil War is going to be huge. I mean, I don't know if anybody's read Civil War, but I read Civil War when it was coming out, and it was a really big deal. And there's a lot that they can do with that.
So Civil War was going on not long before Iron Man came out, right?
Yeah, it was the year before, I think. It was either 2006 or 2007 that Civil War was going on in the comics. And it was a huge deal. It was a massively big deal in the comic world at the time. Because Marvel, I mean, every summer Marvel and DC kind of have their big events and stuff in the comics. But this was one that was just it was just it affected the world a lot of the comics because like, you know, the whole idea is that there's a superhero registration act and some people are for it and some people are against it. And the registration act means
Yeah.
you have to reveal your secret identity, so everyone has to know who you are. And there was like, you know, Iron Man was leading the charge of people for it, and Captain America was leading the charge of people against it. And they had a bunch of other heroes rally behind them, and they were just going at it. And it's just going to be a really good story to kind of adapt to the silver screen, especially now that they got Spider-Man involved, because Spider-Man was a huge part of it, because he's initially with Tony Stark, and then he eventually defects and goes to Captain America's side. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah. But Iron Man, do you think this movie could have come out like in the late 90s?
No.
Yeah.
Not be as effective as it is. I think this film leveraged the special effects of modern films.
Yeah, like
incredibly
definitely
well.
they really hold up.
They
Yeah, a
do.
lot.
And I just think Iron Man as a character, like you need to nail that costume. Like you really need to nail it. And they did in this film, like really well. And just like the visual presentation is such a big part of this movie. You know?
Yeah.
The things that they do, like the style of it, the way they have like the suit, like when he puts it on and kind of all the little pieces coming together.
Yeah.
And the scene when like he's having the dogfight with the planes and he's dodging those around, and the big final slugfest with Warmonger, with Ironmonger at the end. Like those are all like really special effects dependent. And this is a great example of a film that relies on its special effects without having it be a crutch. Because like everything was enhanced by it without like relying on it. But I think doing this film in the late 90s really wouldn't have worked, because I think it just would have been dated by this point, that like any like the flash and substance that was like interesting in the 90s would have just been terrible now. Like a good example of a superhero movie that relied almost entirely on its effects and now looks horrible is Spawn. I don't know if you ever watched the Spawn.
Yeah, I've seen clips of it. I've never seen the whole thing.
Yeah, it was just like it was trying to be like a visual like tour de force, but a visual tour de force in the 90s looks like absolute ass.
Yeah,
now.
like everything in the late 90s that used CGI looks terrible.
Yeah, that's
Like,
the whole
and
thing.
the thing is that like Jurassic Park still looks good because they knew how to use it. Then everybody wanted to use it.
Right.
So
I think Iron Man came out at just the right time, with just the right level of special effects in order to do exactly what to do the character justice without cutting any corners.
yeah, and like it's funny to think that I was watching this thing called Assembling a Universe that was like sort of this like hour special. I think it was on ABC, and they were talking about putting all the characters together in these movies leading up because this special came out before Winter Soldier. And they were talking about when Iron Man was announced, like, the press was like, oh, Marvel's bringing out their second-rate heroes. And now, like, everybody knows all of the Marvel, like, major heroes. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me, Iron Man had never been, like, a second-string character, just because I've always known who Iron Man was ever since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
If nothing else, he showed up in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. I was like, that guy's cool.
Yeah.
And he had his own really bad cartoon in the 90s as well.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, there's like two of them, and neither of them were that great. But the whole thing is that, like, in the comics, none of these characters are really half-assed. Like, there are definitely, like, some shitty characters in the Marvel Comics universe and stuff, but Iron Man's always gotten really great stories. Captain America's always gotten really great stories, and even like smaller characters. Like there's a character called Moon Knight I really think would be awesome if he got a comic book. He's kind of like a more like darker version of Batman, where he's like a dude with a lot of money and a lot of gadgets and stuff, but he kills people. And so Moon Knight's really cool. But there's like, these characters aren't very well known, but that doesn't mean their stories aren't well developed.
Right.
And there's even a lot more room for like developing the character of Tony Stark. Like one of Tony Stark's biggest like personality like flaws in the comics is that he's an alcoholic and he struggles with drinking all the time. There's one Iron Man story, I think it's called Demon in a Bottle. It's like him just dealing with his alcoholism, and that's something they still haven't really addressed in the movies, and I don't know if they will.
Like they've shown him drinking like in almost every movie he's been in,
Right,
but
but like it's
they
like
haven't really hinted at like them going to that kind of story.
right. So, I mean, the medium of comics is great in telling stories if you let it. I mean, like the early '90s were pretty bad. That was a dark time, and like older comics are definitely more cheesy. But we've kind of settled into this place now where comics are telling rather competent stories.
Yeah.
The medium is kind of taking itself a bit more seriously, even if like the general public still kind of isn't. So like, there's a lot of great comics we can adapt into movies if we want to now, especially that like comic book movies are a huge thing, and Civil War is a great example of that. I think this Batman vs Superman movie, it looks like they're kind of taking some pages from Dark Knight Returns, especially with the design of Batman and the slugfest between the two characters. So that's a good story to pull from. I mean, I'd love to see something like Superman Red Sun. That was a cool book. Like comics are just great. And the fact that I think is really cool with the Marvel Cinematic Universe is they're doing what they've always done in the comics but brought it to the movies. In fact, that though there's one interconnected world between all these films. You know, that's something that's always been in the comic books, is that like, you know, there's one New York and all these characters interact in New York. And, you know, like if something happens in Spider-Man, like all the other characters know who Spider-Man is, and that's how you can create crossovers and team ups and things like that. And they've brought that to this like cinematic universe. It's the same sort of thing, and that's great because now you can do something like Avengers and tie them all together when it makes sense. The downside is that I find comic books to be really convoluted because there's so many titles, there's so many things going on, so many writers, that things can get really like messy very quickly, and it's very difficult to follow mainstream comic books today, which is why Marvel started the Ultimate line of comics, where it rebooted essentially everything and had new versions of all these characters and was a lot more basic. And that was back in like I think 2001, 2002, and now it's just as fucking convoluted as the regular universe, you know?
Yeah, because I was looking up like which comics should I read before seeing Age of Ultron, and then like there was a whole list of different things. Like, where do I start?
It's bad, you know, and that's. I mean, when Civil War came out, that was when I started to try and sit down and get into comics. I was like, I'm going to buy every issue of Civil War, and I want to have all of them and all the tie-ins and everything. And it just became so much. Yeah. And just trying to follow it is really difficult. And I'm kind of worried that the films might start doing that too, because you don't want to get to a point where, like, you have to see all these other movies before you see, you know... Like, imagine if Avengers 5 comes out in 2030.
What?
And, like... Okay, if you want to watch Avengers 5, you need to watch Iron Man 2008 all the way up 30 years worth of movies just to understand what's going on. Like, that's a problem, you know? And you kind of have to do that with comics. Like, you got to go back and read, like, specials from, like, you know, the 90s and the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, they've done a pretty good job so far of making them sort of standalone stories.
I think they have to, because I think if you get too... You're not going to be able... Because comics sell in much lower volumes. Like, you know, you sell a couple 100,000 copies of a comic, you're doing really fucking good. And clearly, you know, making a comic book, it only takes a month to do, and your costs are very minimal. Like, you can't throw all the money at a big blockbuster film and just have the comic book nerds come in and make money. It's not going to work. So you have to keep it more accessible. And they've done a really good job riding the line between being faithful to the source material and making it appealing to the general audiences. You know, because, like, I love comics, but I'm not, like, a huge, like, comic book geek. It's like, I'm definitely not like up to date on all of my stuff. You know, I'll peek back into comics every now and then. Like I did a couple years ago. I'm like, Matt Gargan's Venom now. When the fuck did that happen?
Who's Matt Gargan? I don't even
Matt
know.
Gargan is the Scorpion, one of
Oh.
And then I checked in like last year, and then Peter Parker had died, and Dr. Octopus's brain was inside of Peter Parker's body, and he was Spider-Man. I was like, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah, that's what the Superior Spider-Man comics,
So, they do some weird shit, and it's hard to keep track of everything, you know? But the movies are doing a better job at not getting that convoluted.
Yeah, so. Though we'll see with, these Netflix series coming up, and then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. still going on. So, like you got to take those into account now with the movies because they're all taking place in the same thing.
Mm-hmm. I think they'll probably keep some level of separation between those,
Yeah,
though.
like
I don't
there's
think
only
we're gonna
been
see
like
Daredevil
hints.
popping up in Avengers 3 or anything.
Yeah,
Even though that'd be
but
cool.
but Iron Man, really good movie.
Yeah, this wasn't even
Yeah.
about Iron Man. We were just talking about Marvel.
Yeah, we're just talking about Marvel. It was sort of like the introduction, but you know, this was the first Marvel Studios movie, so
It set the groundwork for the whole shebang.
yeah. But Iron Man, really good movie. If you have not seen it, watch it.
Yeah, like
Like,
what the fuck?
Yeah,
Rip
it's
it in.
really good.
It's fantastic. It's definitely worth checking out.
And we'll see you next time when we talk about the Incredible Hulk. Bye.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, by now we're getting a bit used to winter. We're like soldiers in the middle of a campaign, growing hardened to discomfort and better able to